Good morning, everyone. So, on behalf of the Learning Bar, I'm very excited to welcome you today to our webinar. My name is Lorna Cameron. I'm a client success specialist with the Learning Bar, and we are excited to hear from our special guest today. I first discovered their work about 2 years ago. I was through a podcast, and I was immediately impressed. And today, whether you're joining individually or as part of a school team, I know that there are elements of their work that you are going to be able to take in action right away. So before we begin, though, the Learning Bar would like to acknowledge the traditional ancestral territory of the First Peoples in our respective locations on which we're learning, working, and gathering today. So we pay respects to our members, past and present, with honor and gratitude as they have stewarded the land throughout the generations. And I'm confident that we will continue to work together in the spirit of truth and reconciliation. So today's panel explores supporting Indigenous learners through the spirals of inquiry and collaboration. So the spiral of inquiry is a framework for professional learning that's focused on increasing equity and quality for all learners. In this webinar, you'll be introduced to the key underpinnings of the spiral, the evidence-based informing the framework, as well as an overview of the 6 stages and some suggestions on how school teams can get started. And after the presentation, we'll open the floor to questions for Judy and Linda. Please feel free also to put questions in the chat as the webinar proceeds. So at this time, I'd like to introduce you to our panelists. So I'm going to read a bit of their bio here. Dr. Judy Halbert and Dr. Linda Kaser are the co-directors of the Networks of Inquiry in Indigenous Education, and they lead the Transformative Educational Leadership Program at UBC. They are deeply committed to achieving equity and quality for all learners and to networking for innovation and improvement across systems. So, having served in a range of roles in British Columbia, from classroom teachers to principals, district leaders, provincial policy advisors, and university faculty members, they bring a broad perspective to system change. So, I'm so excited they're joining us today. And let's get started. So I know your insights from today's presentation will leave us all inspired, Judy and Linda.
Okay, I'm just checking. Can you hear us all right?
Yes, we can.
Great. Well, thanks, Lorna, and thanks, Joel, and thanks, Melissa. Thanks very much for inviting us today. And we really appreciate the opportunity to share some of the things that are going on for us. And we really look forward to seeing if this makes some sense to you and what we might be able to do together across Canada. It feels like the right time to be thinking about that. We'd like to acknowledge as well that we are joining you from the traditional unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people. It's a beautiful day in Vancouver. Beautiful if you like gray, cloudy, rainy weather, but that's good for nature, and we'll keep the drought away. So again, thank you for inviting us. So I'm Judy Albert, and with me is Linda Kaser. And you will hear from both of us through this. We encourage you to use the chat. We encourage you to think about questions or observations or comments. And we look forward to this just being the beginning of a continuing dialogue. So our intentions for today is to really pose the question, what from our experience here in British Columbia with inquiry networks focused on Indigenous understandings might be of interest or useful to you. So we're really coming at this through a point of curiosity. What makes sense? What do you like? What might you think about a little bit more? And to ground this, we've been working with a network of schools now for 25 years. It started in 2000 with a focus on formative assessment. We've evolved in 2010 to develop a focus on enhancing the experience of Indigenous kids. At that point, it was under the term Aboriginal. In 2017, we developed a 9-year focus on improving transitions for Indigenous learners. And last year, we started working with a specific group of schools, taking a look at what makes the biggest impact for learners, for Indigenous learners in our schools. And this year, we've started a new network focused on nature schools, working in partnership with two non-Indigenous principals and an Indigenous wisdom holder, a fabulous leader in British Columbia. And we're excited about that work. So it's a story of evolution. We have three big goals in the network, and these have come from the schools that we've been working with, and they've evolved and developed over time. So our first big goal is that our purpose is that we want to see every learner, every young learner in our province crossing the stage with dignity, purpose, and options. We want every learner leaving our settings more curious than when they arrive. And we'd like every learner to develop an understanding of and respect for Indigenous ways of knowing. And we believe that through our efforts, we can reduce racism in our schools. There's a lot behind each of those goals, but we're just going to dive in briefly to goal number 2.
They're all connected. You can't be involved in an inquiry process as adults if you aren't developing and sustaining your own curiosity. So growth mindset is important to the spiral, but so is learning more about what encourages or discourages curiosity for young people. And you might be interested in reading, we've been very interested in reading Susan Engel's work. She's a scholar, but she's also a journalist, and particularly the work The Hungry Mind, which is about curiosity, is a really interesting book. She did some research, took some video cameras into grade 5 classrooms to see what teachers were doing to foster curiosity. And before Judy shows the next slide, we just pause and think, okay, what would those findings be? We thought, oh, there'd be, big, complex cognitive findings. But here's what they found. She found that teachers who fostered curiosity smiled more than non-curious educators. They were happier. When young people asked a question, they responded in an encouraging manner. They didn't necessarily get off the track of their lesson, but they had some way of saying, "Oh, Lorna, that's a really interesting question. Put that up on the wonder wall," or something that encouraged the idea that questioning was a really good thing in the environment. And the third thing, and we just love this, is that the teachers involved with producing curiosity in their own classrooms shared their own curiosities, not every day, not every time, not at length, but they told very short, meaningful stories of what they were curious about when they were in, let's say, grade 5 themselves. And I think that ability to personalize curiosity by sharing some of our own adult curiosities is a very healthy thing. I remember my favorite English teacher was like that. She loved to travel. We've had an opportunity to work with absolutely outstanding educational leaders with Indigenous ancestry. And here's one of them. Dr. Trish Rossborough she's passed away sadly, but she was the first person to come to us and say, you've had a lot of success in getting formative assessment practices province-wide. How would you feel about taking on Aboriginal education? There's signed agreements, but we needed to move into classrooms. So it was in a hotel, in a lounge. We wrote a plan on the back of a coaster, and it was both an opportunity and a nudge. Immediately, Judy and I both worked with this brilliant woman. It's Dr. Lorna Williams. Lorna is Lilwat, and these are two of the words from her language that have guided the work overall. Those of you who aren't from BC might know that Whistler is on traditional Lilwat territory, so you can see her territories in your mind as you think about these words. The first word is Coelap, and it's the best word in the world. Look at all the English words we need to explain it, but it's recognizing that need that we have to be in a place sometimes of dissonance and uncertainty. We have to be, curiosity involves a gap between where we are and where we want to be. So you've got heightened awareness and you're open to new learning. And Coelap is the spirit of this work. every aspect of this work. And then Kamukwala is, even in a webinar through technology, can you acknowledge the felt energy when you get a group sort of tuned in together and there's a common purpose that emerges from that group getting together, and then individuals feel safe and free to express their views. So we're hoping that in the dialogue part of this webinar, you will feel enough felt energy and group purpose that you'll be able to express their views. They're powerful, powerful words. One of the really productive things that's happened in British Columbia, the First Peoples, we have many, many nations in our territory, within the British Columbia territory, the traditional and owned territory of the Indigenous people. Not a lot of treaties signed. A group of fabulous Indigenous educators got together and said, what are the things that in all of our traditions really matter? And they've written a declaration of First Peoples Principles of Learning. And you can see three of them there, but I think if you look at some of the materials we've got on the website, you will see all of them. That learning requires exploration of one's identity. We need to know who we are, and we need young people, particularly need young people of Indigenous heritage to know who they are and why they matter. That learning also involves patience and time, and sometimes in Western systems, we're too impatient, and we're all trying to learn to be more thoughtful about the patience and time that's required to learn more deeply. And also that learning is embedded in memory, history, and particularly in story. So story is totally powerful in this work. And many of the teacher leaders who are leading this work are traditional teachers of English who've moved into teaching First Peoples history. Here are two of the people that we want you to get to know. Jo Krona is Shimshan. She's absolutely stunningly smart author and thinker. She's currently co-authoring a book that will come out in the next year that combines Indigenous understandings and formative assessment ideas. And her book, Wewa, every Canadian should read. From every Canadian educator should read it from our point of view. And then Leona Prince and her sister wrote a really, we've given away hundreds of this book. It's Be a Good Ancestor. And this is a book that is just a beautiful book. And Leona, again, is writing another book about that we will use in the nature schools about how to teach nature well. You have to understand something of the language of the traditional owners of the land, because they have a perspective that really helps to get nature learning more deeply. You can see that Leona is a prolific writer, and those of you who are interested in identity, this is a great children's book called Remember Who You Are. And she makes the point that Indigenous pedagogy is fluid and it's based in relationships, that the spirals of inquiry places young people at the center of all knowing, being, and doing. You'll see that we start with talking to young people, and that from her perspective, that she has used the spiral where she lives in northern British Columbia, and she sees the spiral as a very validating framework for Indigenous knowledges.
So let's now take a look at what the spiral is all about and where it came from. So Linda and I we've been very fortunate to work with Professor Helen Timperley from the University of Auckland for about the past 15 years. And if you haven't explored Helen's work on teacher professional learning, we really encourage you to do so. But one of her key propositions is that the complex problems that we're facing in schools today require adaptive expertise. And the only way we can develop adaptive expertise is through collaborative inquiry. So that's the stance that we're taking within the network. We've got challenging problems to deal with, and we have to do it together. And doing it together, we'll learn some new ways of going. So the background to this and where we became so interested in collaborating with Helen is that in New Zealand, there was a major literacy focus several years ago. And schools got a lot of support over 6 years. They've got training, they got resources, they got new materials. It was really in depth. And then as things sometimes happen in political cycles, the project ended. And this led to Helen's curiosity. The question was, what happens when the project is over and the focus support ends? So she went and her colleague Judy Parr went into schools, and they found two important findings that really speak to us about the importance of inquiry. So they found that in schools that continued to use the strategies that they'd learned, they got similar games with new cohorts. So they'd improved the outcomes, and they continued to improve with new groups of learners. So that's a good thing. It was successful to a point. But what they found was in the schools that not only applied the strategies, but engaged in an inquiry cycle and built knowledge within the school, that the gains improved over time, and those gains improved most for the kids that needed the support the most. So in New Zealand, that would be the Maori and Pacific Island students. So when we heard that finding, and we've been working with an increased cycle within the network in British Columbia, we got together with Helen. We spent about 2 years hashing out the ideas to get it as simple as possible. And together we came up with the spiral of inquiry. So the first thing that we wrote was a pamphlet with Helen. Then we wrote a playbook for use across Canada. And then more recently, we've written a book for leaders around how to lead the process. So it's a six-stage framework for collaborative inquiry. So we're going to just walk you through the stages fairly briskly. And really, as we're doing that, we'd like you to be thinking about your own settings and how might this apply for you right now where you are. So at each stage of the spiral, we should be asking ourselves what's going on for our learners and how do we know? And also, why does it matter? So we're going to start with scanning, and Linda mentioned this previously, we're going to listen closely to what the learners have to say about their experiences in our school. We're also going to take a look at all of the formal data that we've got, test information, surveys, and so on. And the key thing is we're going to take that in context of listening to what the learners say themselves. Then we're going to ask ourselves, we've got a lot of information now. What's one area, if we focused on it together, would give us the biggest impact? And at that point, we'll also decide, how are we going to know that we're making a difference? What evidence are we going to be looking for? The next stage is one of the tricky ones because it's where we really have to take some responsibility ourselves and take a look at how we're contributing to this situation. So if in the scanning, say you've discovered that learners are pretty good at decoding, but they don't like reading and they're not reading for pleasure, then we have to ask ourselves, how are we in the school contributing to that? Or if we see increasing levels of anxiety in mathematics, we need to say, how are we contributing to it? So it's really surfacing some hunches. It's not necessarily the revealed truth, but it's about looking at our own current practices. Then we're going to learn something new. And as teachers, and Linda and I are both very action oriented, we know that once we've identified a problem, we just want to go to solution. We want to try some things. And we've learned that this process is around patience and time and slowing down. And so we're going to identify what we actually need to learn new ourselves to try new things. And Helen's biggest argument, the one that really captures us, is that all professional learning in every school needs to be tied to the identified learning needs of the young people that we serve. So we're going to learn something new. It could be a podcast, it could be an article, it could be a book club, whatever, but we're going to dive into some new learning. Then we're going to try some things differently. We're going to create the conditions where taking risks is okay. We're going to reduce the fear of failure. And we're going to check then that we're making enough of a difference. So that's the cycle. In our network schools, we ask schools to do this over the course of a year. It could also be a term. It could be more than a year. But our schools engage in this, and then they write a case study at the end of the year, sharing what they're learning.
So let's dive in. And from my perspective, this is Linda again. This is the most crucial and important and fun and engaging part of the spiral, because at the heart of professional inquiry, from our perspective, is curiosity about what's going on for our learners. These are three young men who wanted a change in their schedule and led a student leadership initiative at a school that we're getting to know well in North Van. We're quite proud of what they did. So scanning begins with two questions, and it draws on both social and emotional learning and cognitive engagement. And I'm going to talk with you about the social and emotional part of it. Um, we agree with this statement that students won't have the internal energy for learning and growth if their safety and belonging needs are not met first. I think pretty much every teacher we've ever met agrees with that, and the support staff do as well. So it's critical to think about safety and belonging needs, and this helps us to do it. From a long questionnaire, a very powerful research questionnaire by an expert in social and emotional learning, was at UBC, now is at the University of Chicago. We asked him, Shona Reichel said, give us the one question will give us the best information about belongingness. And this is the one she chose, and this is the one that we're using. We ask young people in every building that we're in, can you name a couple of adults in a school who believe that you'll be a success in life? And if their eyes light up and they say, yes, Miss Halbert and Miss Kaiser, then we say, how do they show you? How do you get that message that they believe that you'll be a success in life? If they look blank or can't think of anybody, or if they never name a teacher, then we move to a different kind of action. We don't wait for the whole spiral. We use something that we learned from educators in Ontario that had a lot of success. Uh, it's called 2 by 10, and it's the immediate action. And we identify the young people who don't express a sense of belonging or connection to adults who believe, not who care about them, but who believe that they'll be successful in life. And for 2 minutes a day, 10 days in a row, um, we have a short conversation with that young person. And the key here, and we found this in our own action research, is that the focus of those conversations are never about school or work at school. It's always, or learning at school, it's always focused on what the young person is interested in and who they are. So it might be about a pet. What we found with this 2 by 10 strategy is that usually at about day 6 or day 7, the young person is seeking out the teacher. And I think that that's a powerful reminder of how much it matters to be in relationship, to have a sense of kindredness. And we love this strategy. And our goal is to have every network school have 100% of young people who can identify people. Oh, and I just want to say that when we ask this question, the pattern that emerges usually, it's an interesting pattern. And it's the same in every continent that we've worked. When people get back to us and tell us what happens, kids either identify, she pushed me, and that meant that they felt cared about and connected and believed in, or they recognize me. They know who I am. They know my name. They know what I care about. So it's a combination of kind of warm support and tough pushing. So it's an important thing, and that's why it's not, the question isn't who cares about you. The question is who believes in you.
So the second question is in the area of cognitive engagement. And in British Columbia, we were really influenced by the work of the Learning Bar, in particular Doug Wilm and the original survey on Tell Them From Me. And when we saw that across Canada, and it was consistent in our experience in BC, that a lot of the kids, most of the secondary kids said that they were reasonably happy at school. They liked their sports and their activities. They were, more or less on track academically, but less than 50% said that they were engaged cognitively. And we just thought that was a real challenge for us to address. And so this is from John Hattie, and we see this everywhere. The schools are busy. There's lots of doing, but in all of that doing, sometimes there can be little learning. We've also been working closely with Jalmeta and the deeper learning team at Harvard, and really exploring what does it take to create deeper learning in all of our schools. So here's the question that we ask teachers to pose. To ask young people, doesn't matter how old they are, it doesn't matter what subject they're in, but to say, what are you learning and why is it important? And that is providing feedback to us, to the teachers, about how clear we've been with our intentions. Do the young people see the relevance and are they engaged? And we, in our experience, we find that most young people are very capable of saying what they're doing, but when you switch it to what are you learning and why is it important, the quality of the responses drops off. So both the question around engagement and belonging and intellectual engagement and connection to the learning, those are our starting places for the spiral. There are many more questions that we could be asking, and we provide lots of different examples, but we say if you start with these two, you're in solid ground, because your curiosity about the emotional connectedness of kids and their cognitive engagement is going to give you a lot of scope for further inquiry. So within the network, we're asking schools, are we making enough of a difference? And we're asking ourselves that too. So I'm just going to go briefly through some impact assessments that we've done and then open it up for you to ask us some things. So after we started the Aboriginal work in 2010, we did an impact assessment in 2013. And this was the biggest finding of this, is that we were having some success in shifting the thinking of non-Aboriginal leaders and teachers around the province. So we went from thinking Aboriginal education is the responsibility of the Aboriginal department to Aboriginal education is for everyone. Then in 2019, we did a preliminary research report on the work on transitions. And this was led by Dr. Catherine McGregor from the University of Victoria. And she framed this around being, belonging, and becoming, that in schools that are focused on improving transitions, it starts with a sense of identity, starts with a sense of belonging, and it also creates that vision that through school we're becoming something bigger. We've got more options. It's connected to our dignity, purpose, and options. And so there were some questions that came out at the end of this report that were aimed at schools thinking about how they could improve their own practices. So here are some of the questions. We just, sharing these to see how does this fit with your experience. So the first one is, how are you using what you're hearing directly from your learners to inform your inquiry and to check that you're making enough of a difference? And are you creating the conditions to test assumptions and explore hunches? So you can see that this is taking the spiral of inquiry and pushing us more deeply. In 2024, we also did a follow-up report on what was happening in the transition schools, and we were pleased with these outcomes, that we are seeing a significantly increased sense of belonging for the Indigenous learners in the schools that were involved, and an increased sense of pride in their cultures and confidence in themselves. And really importantly, that the Indigenous learners began to see themselves more positively as learners, and that the deficit-based perspectives of the learners shifted, and so did their own perceptions of their own potential. So we went from 2013 seeing that we were shifting the views of educators to now we're seeing an impact on the views of the learners themselves. We created a series of videos. We have four videos on our website that just so that you can hear from the learners themselves. And we encourage you to take a look. I know that the Learning Bar will share the links with you afterwards. This is from one school, Charles Hayes Secondary School in Prince Rupert. And we are doing a more in-depth case study of that school and that will be out sometime this spring. So we hope that you'll stay connected with us and that we can continue to learn from each other.
So what's next for the networks as a whole? We are going to continue the Indigenous Education Impact Initiative. 3 absolutely brilliant Indigenous educators are leading that work with 9 schools in 5 districts. And we want to understand more about how we create this as a system, not as an individual, hardworking people working kind of alone. We want to see the systemic parts, and we're hoping that the case studies will help with that. We're passionate about the Nature Schools Network. I'd be very interested if anybody's interested as part of this webinar, whether, if you think about the cognitive question, what are you learning about nature and why is it important? We think that healthy answers to those questions will help us with well-being and with global circumstances, let's put it that way. We're going to continue to focus on student decision-making. We've got some ways of really making work against racism in powerful ways that the students have figured out how to do by combining decision-making and the spiral. And we're going to continue. We know it still really matters that young people are literate and that they have the numeracy skills they need. And also post-COVID, that they're really getting better at self-regulation because there were some losses during that period of time. And there's going to be, as I mentioned at the beginning, a new publication in September 2026, Indigenous Informed Assessment Practices by Crona and Brooke Moore, 2 fabulous network educators. So you can watch for that. Learn more. If you want to participate, we have Learning Bursts where network schools show what they're doing, and they're all free, and it's a way of us staying in touch. We started them during the COVID period, and we've continued them. And there's also something called collective conversations where there's a couple of network leaders, and somebody poses a bit of a pedagogical dilemma, and the people who are on the call, they're half an hour sessions. Both of these things are half hour. We have short attention spans on the West Coast. We found that it works best if they're 29 minutes. You can tune into those conversations too. They're a lot of fun.
So just on the Learning Burst, the one on December 2nd is going to be focused on 2 of the schools that are involved in the Indigenous Impact Initiative. So if that's your area of interest, we really encourage you to sign up for that. Again, they're free. And February 3rd, it's going to be on nature schools. So we would love to have you involved.
And then one other invitation, we always hold a small, we call it a symposium. It's about 250, 300 people. And all of the people who are passionate about inquiry, we get together over several days in May. And this year we feel incredibly fortunate to have Ron Berger, the founder of Expeditionary Learning, joining us. Leona Prince, who, as I said, is an author and a genius. Joe Crona, who's leading important work, and a whole bunch more of people in a highly interactive. We even have, we're proud to have a DJ. We started that last year. We even have a dance party on the Friday morning. So if you have relatives in British Columbia, May is quite a nice time to visit. You can check out the symposium. We want to emphasize strong roots, but we also, Catherine Murdoch will be with us too, an international inquiry thinker. This is a time for public educators to strut their stuff. I think, when you look at global trends, being proud of what we do, telling the story of what we do in a public way, these are important things. So we want to emphasize our powerful roots in Indigenous thinking and assessment thinking, and our need to rise up and tell our stories. So join us if you can.
And finally, we just want to introduce one more term from the Lil'wat language, and that's Katlila. And, we know it's midday on, what day is it? Tuesday. So here's our encouragement to you that at the end of the day today, before you, hop in your car and race home or whatever, that you find just a couple of moments of stillness and quietness amidst your busyness to know in the quest for knowledge. So we've packed a lot into this 36 minutes, and we'd really encourage you to stop, listen deeply, and from both Linda and I, we say thank you. And in the Hunkamalum language, we say Heichka, and that means we raise our hands to you in appreciation for what you do. So we'll stop sharing now and turn it over to Lorna and Joel and see what questions you might have.
Thank you so much, Judy and Linda. You brought back some memories there. The last time I was in Charles Hayes Secondary, I had a basketball team. I think we probably slept overnight in the gym. But a beautiful place. And I mentioned that because that video and many other videos of the work happening in the schools is on your network website. So I encourage everyone to go on the website and look into the videos and the resources that you have. You gave us, yes, you gave us so much. You gave us a lot of things I think individuals joining today can take away, those learning intentions, creating that curiosity in our learners. It made me think of a teacher I worked with, and she had Genius Hour once a week. And the students got to work on what they wanted to work on for their projects, and that was in a First Nations school. But I wanted to, while we're waiting for a couple more questions to come in here, if you could elaborate a little bit on how TLB data, once those schools are ready to delve into this inquiry process, how TLB data can support or be involved in that process. And that would be the student survey, the Our School. Yeah.
Well,
Uh,
I think that the survey data is really important, and um, our, you know, you may disagree with this, but we think that sometimes there's too many questions on surveys, and it can be a little bit overwhelming for teachers to try and figure out how to make sense of it. So our thing would be to go through the data, pick out two or three questions that raise some maybe concerns or curiosities for you, and probe a little bit deeper into that.
yes, yes.
We had a conversation a few years ago with Tony Brick, who is a researcher from the Carnegie Institute in the US. And he said, if you're going to ask questions, don't ask more than five. So that's why we started with two. We think we can manage two, but we say use the Learning Bar data is fantastic, but dig into it more deeply by listening directly to the learners. Um, Linda, would you add to that?
Well, I think it's very helpful. One of the questions there is what school divisions are part or contributing to the initiative, and the answer, Carlos and others, is many. Um, we have 60 school districts in our province, and they're in places like Richmond and Kelowna, for example. The spiral has been used as part of the process for a long time, and the Learning Bar surveys have been used as a part of the
Right.
data system for a very long time. And we have in our province a student satisfaction survey that the last time I looked at it, it had, around 80 questions on it. And that's why, the focus of our work is making sure we talk directly to young people and hear their answers uh, as 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 the start of a process. Because what we found, no matter what country or place we've been working with in our province or the Northwest Territories or the Yukon, once people start asking those questions, something shifts in the psyche of the work at the school, and people do become genuinely curious. I think the other point, Lorna, that I would make is about data generally, because like many Canadian provinces, we're often quite influenced by the United States, is that we want passionately at this time in history to hear the voices of young people. And getting practice at hearing those voices is what we emphasize over everything.
We could give a lot of examples of how those questions have changed things for schools. But I want to come to Gail's question around our parents and guardians involved in any way in the information gathering. The answer to that is yes, and it depends on the school and on the context. And increasingly the Indigenous communities and elders and family members are involved in the process. We're also really pleased that there is a group of mental health workers in Wales that are using the spiral process with their clients and with their patients and in their communities. So it goes beyond schools now. And Gail, I really like your comment that it's great that students are given their voice. The student's voice and having students at the center is absolutely the most critical part of this whole process. It's what opens up new possibilities for everybody.
Yeah, I can remember, Gail, just specifically one school. It was in Kelowna, a very courageous principal. She actually got teams of educators and of actively involved parents, and they formed teams with older students in the school, and they managed in a single day to ask every kid the two questions, and then they moved immediately to action. And just out of interest, one of the actions they found through those interviews and through talking about it as a group of family members and staff members was that young people, the things that they felt really engaged in, and this is John Meadows' research too, were kind of what we would call extracurricular activities. Those are the things that they were passionate about. So in this particular school, what they did, their action when they came to the action stage, was they said, we are going to start our day, the instructional part of our day, with extracurricular type activities. So they just introduced all kinds of things, chess clubs, self-defense clubs, name a thing. And that's how their first days of school worked. And the parents were very supportive of that because they've been so highly involved in listening to what young people had to say. So I think you can take this work to a really deep place and use it for transformation and innovation, or you can take it as, this is very good teaching. I think of my own teaching. I'm an introvert, and I used to hide when kids were coming into the class across the hall in a book room. Now I know that I should be out there and engaging right at the door and greeting everybody who comes into a learning space. So I think you can use it as an individual person or educational assistant or teacher or principal. And that's something that we found that's fantastic.
Thanks, Judy and Linda. You have built a network that spans across multiple countries. It's working very effectively in British Columbia. What about those individuals who are just wanting to start this collaborative inquiry process? Just a little bit about the logistics, because we always hear time, and we know in different countries people set aside different time for professional learning. But what pieces of advice would you give to the principal listening today who wants to build this collaborative inquiry in their school?
Well, I'll just jump in with one example, and then Judy will give it a elongated. I would say, dear principal, don't be afraid, to try the questions yourself. Often we're out on doing a lot of supervision. I always ask the young people these questions. And secondly, don't be afraid to start by getting a couple of teachers just seeing in partnership whether they're willing to be a duo. It doesn't have to be everybody, and it doesn't have to be right away, but starting is good.
And just a very specific thing, this was an Australian school, and the principal and the vice principal team were really keen to get things going. And how they started was the vice principal, just with her cell phone, interviewed some kids, asked kids the question. This was an elementary school, and got some really great answers to the question, can you name two adults who believe you'll be a success in life? And then started a staff meeting with the voices of the kids, talking about the positive things that the teachers did to demonstrate their belief in them. And you could see, and we were at that meeting, where you could see the teacher sitting up taller, smiling a little bit, and wondering, well, what would happen if I asked that question myself? So I think that, just as Linda said, just getting started, but feeding back the information immediately to the rest of the staff. Just say, I'm curious, this is what I'm doing, and then see if you can form a small group. I wouldn't say wait for everybody to be on board, just get started and share the process as you're going.
That's important. And it's so important to come from that student perspective. I remember one year we did something, you've probably heard of it before, called a fishbowl, but we did it at a PD, and we're looking to see, okay, do we know all of the kids in our school? And
Right.
and then but that's coming from the educator perspective, but asking the kids, do you have two people
Okay.
that's key.
Yeah.
Just looking to see if there's any other questions coming in, or maybe Judy and Linda, there's something another piece of advice you want to leave us with.
Before we get to that, Lorna, we do have an anonymous question that came through in the Q&A section. It's a bit lengthy,
Okay.
so I'll just read that out. It says, I'm curious how the spiral of inquiry can make meaningful space for Indigenous knowledge, including elders, land, and family voice, in ways that feel relational rather than just school-based. What approaches have you seen work? So I suppose the question is in relation to Indigenous knowledge in a way that's relational, not school-based. What approaches have you seen work?
Okay.
Well, I think what we're finding increasingly most effective is when elders are working in partnership with the schools. So and then taking on community-based initiatives. So there's a school in the Chaco Lakes in the northern part of our province that is working together with the community on stream restoration and then building an indigenous knowledge directly with the nature schools we're seeing at, and all of the schools they're expected to work, and they are working with Indigenous knowledge holders in the development of their inquiries. So I think it's coming through the direct working with community.
Yeah, and I just want to come in there. It's the notion. I love that question. And I just want to respond to Gail first. I think she's the one with the niece, Kristen Crawford. When you have all my relations, a close relation, good things happen. And I think my answer, if this was face to face, would be to explore what nature schools are going to be exploring because they are outside, they are with the elders, they are built in to those ideas are using the language for lakes and
Right.
rivers and streams that are Indigenous, so that at the end of the year there's this shared understanding. But I think when you see the case study from Prince Rupert, what you will see is that for young people, getting outside the school with their elders in
Mhm.
places of historic interest and importance and natural importance is the key to changing the world
Right.
for the better. And I think the other thing is by having Indigenous leadership of these fabulous educators who know and have those relationships and can
Yeah.
build on them. Those are part of the secret sauce, I think. Great question.
Yeah. A very specific example, just recently we were at a school in Tofino on the west coast of Vancouver Island. And the way that the Indigenous knowledge, about 60% of the kids at the school were Indigenous, but the way Indigenous knowledge was threaded through every part of the day, and the fact that the principal, who is non-Indigenous, is becoming a pretty fluent Nachalna speaker and was able to coach Indigenous kids in their own language was really profound. So I think that we're seeing lots of examples of where schools are becoming real centers for the community and where increasingly elders are feeling not only welcome but honored in the schools. So, we've still got a long way to go, but we've got some great examples. And I think that, as we close, just to encourage you to take a look at the case studies on the website. These aren't stories of perfection. These are stories of real schools asking real questions and doing hard work. But the more that we can learn from each other, I think across Canada, the better off we're going to be.
Well, thank you so much, Judy and Linda. And I'm just looking to see if there's any last questions. And if not, I just want to thank you. It's been a wonderful experience to have you share with educators and everything that you have built upon. Um, it's just amazing. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you.